Senator Hassan, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you and the ranking member for having this hearing. To our witnesses, thank you for being here today. Thank you for your work, and please thank the women and men who serve with you for their extraordinary work, all directed at keeping us safe, secure, and free. I want to start with a question to Secretary Mayorkas and Director Wray. We're dealing with a constantly evolving fentanyl epidemic in this country. Transnational criminal organizations in China and Mexico change tactics frequently, but they continue to be responsible for the vast quantities of fentanyl that is smuggled into the United States, an issue that I and other senators raised with senior Chinese leaders last month, including President Xi, on our recent bipartisan CODEL. Some Chinese exporters even advertise their ability to evade customs and inspections and seizures as they advertise the availability of precursors. When it comes to U.S. law enforcement, what specific steps are DHS and the FBI taking to disrupt and dismantle the transnational criminal organizations that are supplying chemical precursors and manufacturing and smuggling fentanyl and other drugs into the U.S.? And we'll start with you, Mr. Secretary.
Senator, we have a multi-pronged approach to the scourge of fentanyl and attacking the transnational criminal organizations that peddle and smuggle in it. We have transnational criminal investigative units resident in other countries to dismantle and disrupt the cartels, along with our law enforcement partners in those countries. We have operations here that our personnel undertake to stop the flow of precursor chemicals, to interdict the equipment that is used in the manufacture of fentanyl, and to interdict the finished product. Operation Blue Lotus is one example, Operation Artemis, and so many others. We have surged our personnel and resources to, in fact, interdict more fentanyl than ever before.
Thank you, Director Wray.
So we're participating in a number of ways. I think the first that I would mention is our Safe Streets task forces are focused on the gangs that are here distributing fentanyl and other dangerous drugs. We just, for example, just this past month, I guess in September, our Phoenix office, working with our partners, seized something like 400,000 pills. That kind of seizure is becoming almost routine. So there's the distribution side here by the gangs. Our transnational organized crime task forces are focused on the cartel leadership, the source of supply. We have, I think, 380 investigations just into cartel leadership that we're conducting. We also, I think a third I would mention is we have something called J-Code, which focuses on darknet trafficking and dismantling darknet marketplaces of fentanyl and other substances. We also have things like a prescription drug initiative that's focused on pill mills and the providers that contribute to the problem. And then the last thing I think I would mention is we do a number of things to try to raise awareness. A while back, working with DEA, for example, we put out a movie called Chasing the Dragon, which was put into schools everywhere. And we have a number of similar outreach efforts to try to reach students and others on the awareness side. So distribution, supply, darknet, prescription drugs, and awareness.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your efforts. I want to follow up on another theme that Director Wray raised in his testimony, and I'll actually pose this to Director Abizaid and Director Wray. After Hamas's attack in Israel, I think we've all grown concerned, and Director Wray, you mentioned it, that the attack will embolden other terrorist organizations. Have the Hamas terrorist attacks been used by other terrorist organizations in their messaging and propaganda? And I'll start with you, Director Abizaid.
Yes, it's absolutely been a feature of messaging and propaganda since the attacks. We've seen it from al-Qaeda affiliates, almost every single one. We've also seen it from ISIS, which ideologically isn't aligned with a group like Hamas, but is still leveraging this current conflict to try and sow the kind of violence, bring adherence to its cause in sort of an exploitative way.
Director Wray, how does the FBI assess the impact of this propaganda on the threat of homeland violent extremists or other lone wolf actors?
So we have for some time expressed concern, including in our hearings with this committee each fall, that lone actors, homegrown violent extremists inspired by foreign terrorist organizations are in many ways the biggest threat we face here in the homeland. And those lone actors will draw inspiration from all sorts of things. And so to have this many foreign terrorist organizations, this explicitly calling for attacks, significantly, as I said in my opening statement, significantly takes the threat level, the threat environment, the risk to a whole nother level here.
Thank you. A question for Director Wray and Secretary Mayorkas, really following up again on that theme. Hamas's depraved terrorist attack against Israel and the resulting war has really shaken Jewish, Muslim, and other communities all across the world. And Hamas's attack comes amid a growing crisis of violence against religious communities in the United States. New Hampshire Jewish leaders tell me that their congregants are scared to go to synagogue. They are scared to attend even in the cases where a synagogue is able to hire private security to protect worship services. So what are your organization's assessment of domestic threats against religious communities following Hamas's terrorist attack, and what steps are your organizations taking to protect houses of worship and other faith-based organizations? And we'll start with you, Mr. Secretary, and then Director Wray.
Senator, we are indeed, as Director Wray communicated, in a heightened threat environment. We in the Department of Homeland Security, in partnership with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, are taking a number of steps. We are providing information and intelligence to our state, local, tribal, territorial, and campus law enforcement partners. We issued a joint intelligence bulletin together in the immediate aftermath of the terrorist attacks of October 7th. We are distributing funding, as Chairman Peters referenced, through our nonprofit security grant program to further secure places of worship. We are engaging extensively with faith communities, speaking with them about the steps they can take to ensure that the individuals who continue to practice their faith, which is so foundational, are able to do so with a sense of security. We have protective security advisors in each state throughout the country who are providing critical advice to faith communities and communities, by the way, of all faiths.
Thank you, and briefly, Director Wray.
We are tackling it both through investigations and outreach and intelligence sharing. Investigations both through all 56 Joint Terrorism Task Forces. And on the hate crime side, we've elevated hate crimes to a national threat priority. We've done lots of outreach with the Jewish community, both nationally with organizations I've personally participated any number of times, and then each of our field offices does as well. We've done active shooter training for those houses of worship, et cetera. But the reality is that the Jewish community is uniquely targeted by pretty much every terrorist organization across the spectrum. And when you look at a group that makes up 2.4% roughly of the American population, it should be jarring to everyone that that same population accounts for something like 60% of all religious-based hate crimes. And so they need our help.
With a question to Secretary Mayorkas. While border apprehensions decreased slightly in fiscal year 2023 compared to fiscal year 2022, for the second year in a row, there were more than 2 million individuals apprehended crossing the southern border. Apprehensions of family units also dramatically increased in August and September of this year. We have to strengthen border security in ways that not only protect our national security, but are also humane and consistent with American values. That approach needs to include technology, personnel, and physical barriers where it is strategically useful. I'm glad to see that DHS has reversed course from the beginning of the administration and unfrozen funding to fill certain gaps in physical barriers at the border. These gaps create obvious problems, such as the 20-foot gap in fencing I saw in Texas last year when I observed people running back and forth across the border through that gap. Secretary Mayorkas, given that apprehensions are up, what additional resources and authorities does DHS need to improve security along the southern border?
Senator, thank you. I believe I have approved approximately 129 gaps and gate completions. We have sought a supplemental request, a supplemental funding request for people, technology, facilities, transportation of different varieties. We need a tremendous number of resources within, of course, as I've said repeatedly and cannot say too often, a broken system.
Thank you. I'm going to now turn to Director Wray, and again, Mr. Secretary, I'll ask you to weigh in on this as well. In the past 2 weeks, Iranian-backed terrorist groups have escalated attacks on U.S. assets in Iraq and Syria. As a result, the U.S. has engaged in several counterstrikes on Iranian-backed assets in Syria to protect our troops and equities in the region. Are you seeing an uptick in threats to Americans at home or abroad, and what are your agencies doing to increase security at home in light of these growing tensions? And are you concerned about potential retaliation here in the homeland due to the U.S. counterstrikes in Syria?
So a whole number of things packed into that. First, we definitely believe that there is a heightened risk of potential violence here in the U.S., especially from lone actors inspired by any number of foreign terrorist organizations or by domestic ideologies in some way using the conflict as an excuse or a justification, as horrendous and misguided as that would be, to conduct attacks here against Jewish Americans, Muslim Americans, Arab Americans, et cetera. So we're definitely concerned about that, and we are seeing an increase in reported threats, whether it's bomb threats to synagogues, some physical assaults. I mentioned in my opening statement some of the arrests we've had. So we're concerned about that. Second, I am concerned, as I said in my opening statement, that foreign terrorist organizations, traditional, formal terrorist organizations, whether they be Al-Qaeda or ISIS or Hezbollah, have all made statements that would indicate a greater risk of a potential attack here by them. We are not currently tracking an imminent credible threat from a foreign terrorist organization, a structured attack here or something like that, but it is something that we think heightened vigilance is warranted for. And when it comes to Iran and its strategic partner, Hezbollah, I think it's important for Americans to understand that even before this conflict, we're dealing with an adversary that just in the past couple of years has tried to kill a former U.S. national security advisor on U.S. soil, tried to kidnap and then kill an American journalist right smack in the middle of New York City, conducted a cyber attack, attempted a cyber attack against a children's hospital, and tried to interfere in the last presidential election, as Director Ratcliffe and I called out at a press conference in the fall of 2020. That's all on top of being the leading state sponsor of terrorism. So if that's not enough to convince people that Iran is a threat to the U.S., I don't know what would be.
Well, I thank you for that comprehensive answer. Because I'm running low on time, Mr. Secretary, I'll follow up in a question for the record on that. I also will follow up on the issue of northern border security with you. As you know, we have seen an uptick on unauthorized and illegal crossings on the northern border. Part of the thing we are dealing with in New Hampshire and all across the northern border is a lack of technological infrastructure, including cell service and broadband, that makes it very hard for some of our personnel to do their work at the border as effectively as they need to. So I'd like to confer with you. I'll ask a question for the record about how we make sure we are getting the resources we need at the northern border to keep our country safe. Thank you.